Hi, Adam Cox here, and today I'm going to be talking about the techniques that I use to eliminate phobias very, very quickly. In the media, I'm known as the phobia guru, and if you put phobia expert in Google, I'm normally the first name that comes up. And that's because I've got a track record at removing and eliminating phobias in a single session. So the top question that people actually ask me when it comes to dealing with phobias is they say, Adam, what do you actually do? What techniques do you use? What approaches do you use to actually remove the phobias? So this video, I'm going to talk you through exactly what I do. And some of these techniques require me to work face-to-face with people or via Skype. So it has to be one-on-one so I can calibrate what they're thinking, what they're doing, and in what sequence they're doing it. But in many cases, I have audio downloads of clinical hypnotherapy protocol that enable people to experience the same process without having to work with me directly. So this video is simply what I do to help people remove and eliminate their phobias. So a bit about me. My brand is the Phobia Guru. People know me for being a phobia expert. I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist based in Harley Street, which is in central London. And I'm a radio presenter on Share Radio. So many people have heard my show, which is called Modern Mindset. Share Radio is a national radio station that talks about personal finance and business. So I do the psychology segment on that particular radio show, and I'm a public speaker. Regularly, people will see me talking to audiences, anything from 15 to 20 people to many hundreds, about why fear is important, but also how important it is to remove those fears that are no longer useful. Part of how I became so famous for being a phobia expert is because the media caught on to what I was doing in terms of removing phobias very, very quickly, and not just classic phobias like fear of dogs or fear of spiders, but even the more rare phobias, and of course got featured regularly on TV and radio and in the media, which is why I'm seen, as far as the UK media is concerned, as an authority, as a go-to person whenever they want an expert to talk about phobias and why we have them. So the first technique that I really use is very much about the way that I look at it, and hypnotherapists like myself love metaphors. And one of the metaphors that I really like is that neural pathways follow a particular chronological sequence. So you go through a process very, very quickly. And I want you to think about a skill that you can do very well. So that might be driving, for example, or it might be typing, or it might be doing something specific to you, such as a hobby. Now, the reality is, if you've got a certain level of competency with that skill, then it normally means that you're doing things on autopilot. So driving, for example, if you've been driving for many years, you probably have the experience of driving on autopilot without actually consciously thinking about what you're doing. Now, that's important, because if I were to ask you, if you're a driver, a recent time when you drove somewhere, and I said, right, talk me through the process, what did you do? Chances are you're going to miss out vital parts of that process. You'll probably have already chunked it down because it's an unconscious process. So for example, if I said, right, how did you get to that particular place? You might chunk it down so much that you simply say, I drove there. And this is what is happening consistently when people have phobias. They simply say things like, well, I saw the thing, or I had this presentation to do, and then suddenly I was anxious. And that's not strictly true, because if you were driving from your home to your workplace and you've done that journey several times, then you will find that all these little things that you do, actually, you don't remember. So, for example, you would need to find your keys. You would need to unlock the car. You would need to start the ignition of the car. You would need to move it into gear. You would need to take the handbrake off. You would need to drive, signal. All these tiny little things are crucial. Now, why this is important is because if certain parts of that automatic process weren't there, you would never get to your destination. Okay? If, for example, there were no batteries in the central locking for the keys, then the car wouldn't open and you couldn't start the car. Or if you'd lost your keys, you couldn't get into the car to begin with. Or if your battery was flat. So all these things would prevent you from actually getting to your destination. And your phobia is like that. It's a learned skill. It doesn't feel like a skill, but it is. You've learnt unconsciously to get from a situation of being with no fear or anxiety whatsoever to a heightened state of anxiety very, very quickly. And a useful metaphor is dominoes. Because if you look at the image in front of you, these dominoes, you know what would happen if you tipped over the first domino. You would know that the first domino would then tip over the second domino, then the third, until it went right through to the end and all dominoes have fallen down. This is what it's like with your phobia. Certain things have to happen in a certain order, and if they don't happen in that order, you will never reach the state of severe anxiety or panic. So this particular approach, what I call a pattern interrupt, can only work when I'm working one-on-one with clients. And the reason for that is because I need to work out what the individual dominoes are for that particular person. For example, for someone to be afraid of spiders, in many cases, they might have to either see or think of a spider. That might be domino number one. Domino number two might be to make that picture really big in their mind's eye. And domino number three might be an internal monologue or dialogue where they say things like, oh, it's getting towards me, or it's getting closer. So there's a certain sequence of dominoes that are required for that person to feel a particular state of anxiety. So when I'm working one-on-one with someone, what I do is I ask the question, what would I need to do to feel what you feel? And by asking certain questions, looking at their eye movements, their body language, even paying close attention to the words that they use, I'm able to pick up on the things that they've forgotten that they do because it's happening completely unconsciously. And what that does is it enables me to work out what the sequence are for that particular person in order to feel anxious. So the great thing there is that if, for example, if you look at this image of the dominoes, you started thinking, right, what would happen if two of those dominoes in the middle were simply missing? You would know that even if you flicked the first few dominoes over, they would topple, but they would never reach the second half of the dominoes, in which case it wouldn't get to its destination. And that's something that I do with clients. Essentially, I look at the sequence of events, the dominoes, and in what order, and then I work with them to change what the dominoes are and also the direction that they go, so that it's not possible for them to reach the destination of anxiety. At which point, you might be thinking, well, if they never reach to the stage of panic or anxiety, where do they end up? Well, one of the things that I try and do is elicit from them a time where they've been very resourceful in a time where perhaps other people have been panicky or anxious. And most people have this experience. They have had a time in their life that when everyone around them was losing their head, they were in a very resourceful state. So what I tend to do is the start of the sequence has to be the same. Because if the start of a sequence is being invited to speak at an event, for example, or booking flights to go on a particular holiday, the start of the sequence is important, is exactly the same as what you will experience in real life. But the important things are that we want to change are the evaluation or the internal imagery or the internal self-talk so that it never gets very far. And in fact, we can then reroute the dominoes, rewire the mental circuitry, those neural pathways. So although it starts off in the same sequence, it then goes to a state where the person is feeling more resourceful. And sometimes resourceful is just the absence of fear and anxiety. So for example, many of my clients are experiencing anxiety on a level of 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, what we call the subjective unit of distress. If they can go through exactly the same initial event, so being in the environment that triggers their anxiety, and that anxiety only reaches a 3 or a 4 or a 5, the fact that it never reaches heightened states of anxiety means that that anxiety is manageable. So it doesn't have to be that someone who is afraid of dogs suddenly loves dogs. Simply being ambivalent, not caring if dogs are around, will feel like paradise to someone that has spent almost their entire life being completely terrified by dogs. So this approach is what I call the pattern interrupt, or the rewiring technique, and it's essentially where I model what the individual has to do to experience the anxiety and then mess up that pattern so it never works in the same way. And a useful analogy for this, for example, is if you remember old vinyl records, for example. Vinyl records follow certain grooves, they follow certain sequences, so the needle on the record goes around in a particular order. Now, if you completely scratch and mess up that pattern on the grooves, then even if you played the record that was the same record as before, because you've messed up the pattern, it doesn't play in the same way that it did. And that's essentially what I do for clients. And a useful example of how quickly a pattern can change is an example that I use for myself that doesn't involve a phobia, but does involve unconscious behavior. So in my teenage years, for example, I used to love eating apple turnovers. And there was one time when I was eating an apple turnover, completely on autopilot, as many people do with a packet of crisps or chocolate. But I was eating this apple turnover, and there was a crunch where there shouldn't have been a crunch. And as I look into the half-eaten apple turnover in my hands, I can see half a wasp that's wriggling around. And then I could feel something else moving in my mouth. And at that point, of course, I spat it out, saw that it was the remainder of the wasp. Luckily, the stinging part was in the apple turnover. But suddenly, by associating huge amounts of disgust, particularly unexpected disgust, to that particular situation, now meant that I had new associations linked. I'd messed up that automatic pattern. So it could never work in the same way as it was before. So whereas before I was eating lots of these apple turnovers, going onwards, I've probably eaten maybe 2 or 3 in my entire life since that point. So you can change a pattern very quickly, and it just doesn't work the same way as it did before. So that is pattern interrupt and what I call rewiring. And this rewiring is actually a good analogy because neural pathways are a bit like the internal circuitry of the brain. So that's the process of the pattern interrupt and rewiring.